I'm Christa Evans and I'm a mum to 3 gorgeous children and a wife to Phil. And I'm also a passionate mountain biker and a triathlete and anything that involves adventure and excitement and doing things. My work persona is Christa Bell, which is my maiden name, and I work as an emergency specialist, and I specialise in children's emergencies, and I also work in children's intensive care. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was diagnosed with an early form of breast cancer, and unfortunately it's incredibly common, and probably about 1 in 8 women in Australia will get breast cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. Leading up towards the end of April, I'd found some lumps in my breast, and I'd had lumpy breasts in the past, and I'd had biopsies and needles, and it'd always been fine. Just before the 29th, I'd had a couple more biopsies done of some lumps I'd found. And then about 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, 1st of May, my GP called me and she said, which was a bit unusual, she told me that the results had come back from my biopsies and that I had breast cancer. And that was probably the first time I heard those words, and I can still see where I was sitting. I'd left a meeting, I kind of walked back into that meeting and just said, I just have to go. And I didn't tell anybody why. And I was like, had that period of time to myself to let it kind of sink in. So I kind of had this walk of about maybe 200 meters, and I bumped into the first person on the ambulance ramp actually. And that's when I said, I've got breast cancer. And it just didn't sound right, you know? Like I was kind of, oh, me? I'm not supposed to be the one who has cancer. And then by the 3rd time I told someone, it was a bit easier and it was a bit more obvious, but I still didn't quite believe it, even though I knew it was true. At the time, I still had to come up with a plan. So I rang around and I rang one particular surgeon that I knew and I liked, and I said, I've got breast cancer. That's probably like the 4th time I've said it. And he just said, you can come straight away to my rooms. Then I rang my husband and I said, hey, how are you? Well, actually I've got breast cancer. I'll see you in a couple of hours. I'm just going to see the surgeon and find out what that all means. It was interesting being on the other side of the table or the bench. You notice things, certainly things that I've taken with me. And my surgeon, my decision was I decided to have a double mastectomy. He said, look, I will not tell you what you have to do. I will give you options, but if you make a stupid decision, I will tell you it's a stupid decision. And I said, fine, that's good. That's what I need. I just need someone to tell me if I'm doing something stupid. So my treatment did involve a double mastectomy. It did involve chemotherapy. It did involve going bald. And it was very interesting because I thought that I was different, that my hair wouldn't fall out. And I really, truly believe that because I don't know whether it was the steroids that you get a lot of steroids and they make you a bit high. I thought I was different to everybody else. I clearly did. And so being a doctor, yeah, so there was a few interesting times. And when you're told you've got cancer, your whole world changes. All the normal things that you're fighting for, like at the time, I think I was incredibly stressed. I was getting sucked more and more into work, and I was losing a bit of focus globally about what life really is about. When I heard those words, that all went, that didn't matter anymore. And it's really interesting how what really matters is your family and those people that you love around you, and work, that'll be fine without me. But there were instances where I was you become immersed in cancer and all its treatment, where someone would ask for some advice, and it was just really weird but nice to jump into doctor mode again and then go, oh shit, I've got to go back and do cancer journey first before I can fully get back there. So it wasn't nice being on the other side. I was really grateful though that I had doctors that really looked after me, and it was interesting as a patient. One of the biggest things I learned was you just want to feel safe. And if somebody really cares, they're going to make sure you stay safe. But one of the guys who has worked for years here, Hugh Birch, he happened to be on in theatres when I went in to have my surgery, and he just came in and he said, I won't let anything bad happen to you while you're asleep. And I woke up and he was there next to my bed in recovery, just sitting there. so I always call him my guardian angel. He's just one of those really kind, calm people who you didn't expect was going to do anything like that. I guess knowing the medical stuff can be challenging as well. And I felt that I ought to read lots of papers, but I didn't. Like, I just kind of went for, with the oncology side of it, I thought, I'm not an oncologist. I'm just going to let the oncologist tell me. And so she was wonderful. She just said, this is what you need. And I said, fine. Didn't really ask too many questions. So yeah, it wasn't nice being a doctor, but at the same time, there were a few little perks, like I always saw the consultant. And yeah, people were really lovely. So I already had 2 close friends who were going through cancer treatment at the time. One of them happened to be a friend and mentor of whom I worked with, Leo, and he and his journey had made me really realise how incredibly lucky we are. Unfortunately, with Leo, he was faced with much more, how can you say, more nasty cancer, in that there was no cure, and I still, at the time of my diagnosis, was in a group, hopefully, that meant this could be a disease I was able to fight, beat, and hopefully not see again. My other friend that was very integral, I think, to how I came to be positive was Paul, and he was a very close family friend, and they were probably like cousins to us. And unfortunately, in the November just prior to my diagnosis, Paul had been diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer, and there was no possible options of cure. He, like Leo, went on a mission to try and stay in this world for longer and be around for his beautiful wife and his daughter. So I guess for me, I was not in such a bad position. And then I was kind of inspired because of Paul and Leo to like fundraise for Cancer Council. And it was cool because in the end we just changed the goals. Like, I couldn't do the marathon, so I said, right, well, we've still got a marathon bib, I've entered, it's still got to get to the finish line, and so I can't raise this money on my own, so I opened it up to a team. And so then I had a whole group of people who joined me, and our fundraising goals, which had been 56,000, because that was 5,600, sorry, that was 100 years for every day Paul had been in this world making a better place, suddenly got blown out, and we raised over 13,000, but that was because we were a team. And so on the actual marathon day, because he died the morning just before the marathon, and that day I'm sure he was there, like it was just the most beautiful sunrise, and I was like, oh, I'm sure you're here running with me. So I did the 10k, and my friend took my marathon bib. She was still running the marathon, so she had both hers and Paul's bib, and at the end I put Paul's bib on and ran the last bit of the marathon, because I ran the last 10k of the marathon with her, but with Paul's bib. We raised much more than we ever intended to, and then we did it again the next year, and yeah, so we've carried on from there on. So Paul's Rainbows, that team name came because the day of Paul's funeral, there were just rainbows everywhere in the sky. And so that for me now is very significant. And it's really nice, like the same as when I walk into work and I walk past Leo up the wall, I go, all right, I'll do the best job I can today. I see rainbows and I go, oh, hi, Paul. I think probably, and then sometimes this sounds a little bit cliche, but the ability to be truly present, I think, is the thing that I've learned. It is a daily challenge to continue to do that. Part of my workup was I'd had my biopsies, I'd had my mastectomy, I'd had my nodes, all of that business done, but you had to have the total body scans to see, is it already spread? Because at that point, up until you get that, you don't know whether you're early breast cancer and you've got a really good chance of survival, or you've got stage 3 or stage 4 where it's all completely different. There's a period of time when you have your dye injected, and this is probably the moment that the clarity all came about life and things for me personally. That period of time where it was uncertain, it wasn't certain whether this was early breast cancer or whether was I facing, like my friends, something that wasn't going to be curable. I do have a faith, and I did say a little prayer, and I stood in these little trees outside Pindara, and it was the weirdest feeling, and like it was quite probably a very spiritual moment, but I didn't feel alone, and it was really, and I thought, well, whatever it is, it's going to be okay, even if it was dreadful. And that was my mindset, because and that moment, and this sounds really crazy, but like everything, like the green of the trees looked greener, like the sky was bluer, everything, I became suddenly much more aware. And I think it was that realization that if I didn't have very many minutes, hours, days, like I thought I was gonna, like we all think we live in forever, don't we? That what was actually around you, became much more observant and much more immersed in that. So that was a real turning point for me. And then luckily, I didn't have any signs of any extra cancer anywhere else. It was now I'm quite aware of that, and I think probably as well learning about mindfulness and the ability to be present, because up until then I was on that you're busy, you get sucked in, and now I have to manage that. It's really easy not to, like, you could easily get sucked back onto that freeway again of being busy in life, but you check yourself and you just go, okay, stand back, just stop and be aware of everything. And so I think I get it now. I still have to manage it, and I don't do it perfectly. But I think you kind of go, I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. I don't know. And I think I'm really now aware of how quickly that could get taken away. So instead of going, I'll do that next year, I just do it now, in case I'm not here next year, in case next year all of a sudden it's come back and it's in my bone or something like that and I can't do anything. So I think that's my mindset. I think perspective in anything when you're facing something challenging, to actually take perspective of that and look at other people and the situations they find themselves in. I think that really helped, and those two blokes were certainly very integral to my perspective, but also just their approach to being faced with illnesses that couldn't be cured. They still, as I would say, sparkle and shone and gave a lot to everybody around. I felt it was my responsibility to do likewise. So I guess I'm a very positive person anyway. At the time of my diagnosis, I was actually fundraising for Cancer Council Queensland, and I had been inspired by both Leo and Paul. So I was training to do the marathon, and certainly having to stop and have some treatment for breast cancer was a bit of a pain in the butt. I think the first thing I said to my surgeon when I walked in was, it's 10 weeks till the marathon. If you chop my boobs off now, do you think I'd still be able to go running? And I think the fact that he didn't think that was ridiculous meant that he was my right surgeon. He said, if you haven't got to have chemo, it's a possibility. So I was like, please don't let me have to have chemo. How do I stay positive? It was by having perspective. It was by feeling how lucky I was. At the same time, lucky, unlucky. Within 2 days of my diagnosis, this little box of interesting things had arrived from Mel and Tonya, and it was just full of like cool stuff. And one of the things in there was we bought a zoo, that movie, and I think up until then I hadn't cried, and that was the night before my operation. I was just like bawling, and it was just perfect because I just needed that emotional release. But so I got that care package, and then there was the whole department. They made me the little ribbons after my second surgery. This big quilt turned up with a ribbon, and there was millions of ribbons all sewed on in the shape of a love heart with the individual staff's names, and Paul's name was on there because he was in hospital at the time. They'd come and got him to write his name on, and this beautiful like healing blanket turned up. And I think that sort of stuff, you can't underestimate the power of that. And then probably finally one morning I woke up and I opened my computer and I was like, what is that picture? And it was just a picture of a hand with a little piece of paper or this wall with all these little pieces of paper in the wall. I'm thinking, what is that? And my friend had told her friend, who happened to be in Jerusalem, and who'd gone and written a prayer on this piece of paper and put it in the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And I was like, oh my goodness, like people like on the other side of the world who have no connection to me are cheering me on. And I think that's the thing. It's people cheering you on. You can't let them down, and you don't want to. I mean, you can have sad times, and clearly, you know, your family are your number one supporters. But yeah, those random things that you just go, wow. And there were some things I really learned, and I'm very grateful for, I guess. So the horrible thing is that in my mind, I was the strong one, I was the carer, I was the one running the marathon, I was the one cheering people on, I was the one supporting people, and all of a sudden I needed help. And that was actually quite confronting. So I think something else happened, and I feel very strongly about this when anybody is faced with a really challenging diagnosis, is that the kind of outpouring of love and support that's probably going to make me emotional. That was probably the thing that I actually wasn't prepared for. And I think it's that when it's really horrible, it's that carries you through those really tough times. And I was completely overwhelmed. And I think one of the things, I've previously sat down and I've written down all the good things, and the good things certainly outweighed the bad things that came out of that. And to experience that level of support and love from people around you is just amazing. And I think that's probably something that I've taken and I just want to give to other people. So, you know, like you probably know some of the things I do, and like supporting other people when they're diagnosed with cancer and stuff. And it just, I think I have got the privilege of being able to do that, and having been on the privilege of the other end of that, I know how much that means. So I did have days when it was all too much, and there was tears, and I was angry, and it wasn't fair. See, the biggest thing that's not fair is that you don't want to put your children through the pain of stuff like happening to you and to lose you. And that made me really angry at times. But there were times when that whole, am I really going to be here? That was very confronting. And there was lots of tears and being angry. But my husband Phil knows me really well, and he was a really good mindsetter for me. And he would just let that be, let it happen, and then I'd kind of reset. I never ever felt like I wanted to give up. I always kind of thought, no, I'm going to do this. And I had little mantra things that I'd do. I made myself do 50 squats every day in chemo because I wasn't going to get all flabby. But no, I never felt that I was going to give up. But I did feel at times very sad and very angry. There is always somebody worse off than you. And my diagnosis happened to come just after the bombings in the Boston Marathon. And I can remember clearly saying to my mum, it's only breast cancer, it's not motor neuron disease, or I haven't lost my leg in the Boston bombings. And so I think we always have to come back to our situation might be awful, but there's probably somebody in a worse position.